I'm talking about my tours.
You ready?
I wouldn't be here all day.
Okay, welcome to the Coach's Office, a podcast about Liberty Eagles football program. You know, I was thinking about last night also kind of adding into there. We talked about this before about how most content for coaches is from coaches that are already super successful with like wins and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for coaches out there that are in the middle of grinding and trying to get their teams to that point to maybe have a perspective from someone who, from a group of coaches that aren't there quite yet, but are seeking that every day and trying to get there. Because you come across coaches that haven't lost a game in like 6 years, and it's like, well, they don't really.
They're operating in a very different world.
Yes, and we're all trying to get there, but it's kind of nice and refreshing sometimes as a coach to find someone who's in the middle of trying to get there. Yes, going through that. Yeah. So that's also kind of the purpose of this podcast. I am the host. I'm the head coach of Liberty Eagles, Ryan McMillen, and I am joined by the Fantastic Four.
Fantastic.
How do you guys like the nickname?
What, you can't say that.
I kind of what?
Isn't that like trademarked?
Shh. That's what I came up with last night. I was like, I'm going to call them the Fantastic Four.
The Fantastic Four. I like it.
So these four guys they put in tons of work. That's why they're so fantastic. You okay with the nickname?
It's great.
When you say it like that.
Yeah.
With
the smile.
Every time you say it, I'm less okay with it.
Come on.
All right. Brad Smith, Kenny Nally, Craig McMillen, and Macklin Parks. These guys are doing a lot of the positional coaching for our team. We have some other coaches, too, that do a lot of other things behind the scenes, but these guys are out there coaching every day in the weight room, on the track, and then at practice.
And in the pit.
In the pit. Today the kids were in the pit. So it's been a little while since we've recorded an episode, so we'll see how today goes. Hopefully we don't have to re-record this because Macklin doesn't like it when we have to do that. So hopefully it's good.
Macklin doesn't like anything.
So we started with the team. We started, I guess it was last week. My brother Craig, his part of his main job is to facilitate and I don't know if facilitate's the right word. Build the mental toughness side of our team a little bit. And one of the things we wanted to start doing was share stories with our team about people that have done some incredible things, that have defeated the odds, that when you look at their situation, they shouldn't have come out on top, they shouldn't have survived, whatever it may be. So the first one we talked about with the team, was it last Thursday, I think? Craig, is this the name of the book, Overcome?
Yeah.
So there's a book called Overcome, and it's written by a guy named Jason Redman. Jason Redman, and Craig, jump in at any point to add it if I miss something or anything. I'm going to try and paraphrase a little bit so this doesn't go for an hour. But Jason Redman was a Navy SEAL. He wasn't the greatest student in high school. Kind of was told his entire life he wouldn't amount to much, I guess. Well, he becomes a Navy SEAL, which is one of the most elite fighting forces in the world, and defeats the odds already once. And there's a lot more to the story about his journey going into the Navy SEALs that is in the book. And he's also on some podcasts and things, and he talks about his journey. But today we're really going to talk about the journey once he's gotten into the Navy SEALs and kind of the event that changed his life kind of forever. So in this story, they get some intel on an enemy and where that enemy is located. They show up to this building where that enemy is supposed to be. The enemy's not there. And then they start getting reports that the enemy is in this other building 100 yards away or so, 150 yards away. So they start moving to that point. And on their way to that point, I think his group gets separated, right? They lose communication. Eventually he gets caught in a crossfire between the enemy and his own Navy SEALs. Well, in that time he shot. I think he got shot in the chest, right? Was it his left arm was severely wounded, right? I think it was his left arm.
Yeah.
to the point where he thought he had lost it. So his arm was shot, and I think what ended up happening was he was actually laying on top of the lower half of his arm, and that's why he thought it was gone. So his arm was pretty bad, and he was laying there, kind of in the middle of this crossfire. So I'm going to pick up here. Craig has done a good job of going through and kind of paraphrasing this book. So I'll pick some key points out here, and I'll just read the story a little bit. So it starts off, I was shot the first time when a hidden machine gun nest just 10 yards from my position opened fire. I was hit immediately, bullets stitching across my midsection. Most embedded themselves in my body armor, but 2 rounds struck my left arm, nearly shearing it in half. We had a question from a player when we were doing the SWAT thing the other day if getting shot in a bulletproof vest still hurts. And yes. Yeah, it knocks you down. Very much so. In the confusion of the fight, I thought my arm had been severed from my body. Bullets continued to ricochet off my gun, my night vision goggles, and my helmet as I struggled to understand the ambush and lead us out of it. There were 2 enemy machine guns firing from only 50 feet away, as well as a dozen enemy AK-47 shooters. I was stranded in a devastating crossfire of thousands of rounds the size of my thumb. So he's stranded in this crossfire with no real cover. He goes on to say behind him a little ways was a John Deere tractor tire that they were trying to get to, but that was really their only cover. Behind that was literally thousands and thousands of yards of nothing. Fear and terror attempted to grip my mind, but I pushed them away. I knew I had to get to cover. I was going to die right there on the spot. I looked behind me and saw nothing but thousands of yards of empty Iraqi desert. Then I saw muzzle flashes from my teammates shooting past me at the enemy. There was a large John Deere style tractor tire my teammates had jumped behind to make their last stand against an overwhelming enemy force. Something that would stop bullets and give us a position to fight back from. Despite my injuries and pain, hope welled in my soul. I had to get to that tire. I rose to run to the only cover available, but as I leapt forward, a bullet struck in front of the right ear and traveled through my face, blasting off my nose, blowing out my cheekbone, vaporizing my right orbital floor, and shattering all the bones above my eye. The guys at the tire saw my head whipsaw forward and watched me collapse and crash into the ground 10 yards in front of them. I blacked out as my blood soaked into the foreign soil. I think it's super important for young men, just from kind of a superficial perspective of the story, to just understand that there are people out there putting their lives on the line for us to be free to do this, to play football, do whatever.
Just to be clear, that's my brother putting stuff onto this. Was not my purpose in doing this.
What?
I wasn't
from supporting our troops.
Right.
Yes.
That's my brother, right? So I'm not trying to point the finger at myself or anything.
No.
Like that.
About how great you are.
Right. That was not my intention.
About how much you've sacrificed.
My brother really
for us,
makes
Craig.
makes me feel like that at the moment because he just said that. But so that's not necessarily one of the things.
If you
wanted our
know
guys
Craig
to
at
take out
all,
of this.
you would never even know Craig was in the military or that he did anything, because that's the type of person he is. He would never. The kids wouldn't even know anything about him if I didn't tell them specifically things that have happened to him and what he has done. So this isn't Craig at all. This is me working with young men and understanding that they need to understand there are people out there who are sacrificing a lot for them. They're sacrificing a lot for people they don't even know.
I had a bunch of other reasons for putting this together, but
yes, and that's, to me, that's face value. If that's all they get out of it, that's great. But there's so many other things in the story that we do talk about. All right, so here we go. Let's continue here. When I came to, I was caught in the open, on the X, the kill zone, the point of attack. While the firefight continued to rage over me, I was bleeding out, caught between my team and 2 machine guns that had nearly killed me. Anger that allowed us to get into the situation slowly gave way to the realization that I was going to die. This part really struck me, and I don't know if it struck you, Craig, because one of our core values is ownership and owning what happens to you, owning your performance. And sometimes things are going to happen to you that are completely out of your control. This whole situation that Jason Redmond was in was out of his control. He could have blamed the intel. He could have blamed their communication going down. He could have just blamed anybody for the circumstance he was in. Because at this point, he had been shot in his arm, shot in his midsection, shot in his face. Most people probably would blame God at this point, and he's not blaming anyone but himself. He's taking ownership, and anybody could sit back and go, dude, that's not your fault. This is a freak accident. This is a freak thing that's happened. And he's not doing that. He's mad at himself for getting himself and his guys into this situation. So that was kind of...
And that's the thing that keeps him alive.
Yes.
You don't want to take ownership, and maybe you shouldn't even have to. But in the end, that doesn't actually get you anywhere. You're stuck in the same position. You're stuck out there bleeding out and dying. The only thing that got him out of that position was sort of owning up to what happened, even if it wasn't his fault, and trying to work out of it.
I mean, probably if you take the victim mentality there, he's just going to lay there and pass away and die, Here, we'll keep going here. I can feel the life slipping out of me. To be honest, it was a luxury knowing I was dying. For some people, death comes in a millisecond. They don't even realize it's coming. For me, I was lying in that firefight for 35 minutes, which left ample time to reflect. That also was unbelievable to hear that he was laying there for 35 minutes. And this is good for our players to realize, we put them through some hard workouts for roughly 35 to 40 minutes. And for them to go, okay, this guy was laying there with multiple bullet holes, one that had traveled through his face for 35 minutes. If he can last 35 minutes with that, I can push through 35 minutes of a workout.
I mean, that whole SWAT workout, how long was that? 30 minutes?
Probably.
Yeah,
it was quick.
Yeah, it was pretty quick.
with breaks.
Yeah. So it just puts into perspective, when they feel like, and when I say they, I'm referring to myself. I'm referring to us coaches. We're not just, when we talk, we're not talking about just the players. We're talking about really everybody myself, Coach Smith, everybody here. We have a tendency to lose perspective and think that whatever it is we're going through is harder than anything else. Well, it's not, and sometimes it's good to have a perspective that.
Well, and one of the benefits of these stories is, right, the more we're focused on our own suffering, on our own pain, the stuff we're going through, right, that drives you. The mental toughness books always talk about how that it drives you down into this hole of despair, right? It makes it harder and harder for you to overcome that, for you to get out of that. Right, the more you can focus on, your team or the world around you or somebody else's pain, right, the more that shifts your mindset and the stuff that's going through your mind, right? And so the more you can, our guys can focus on, something outside of their own pain helps them overcome things. Just that fact helps them.
So at this point, there were the teammates that were behind the tractor tire. They couldn't rush out and save them. Because at that point, if they were to rush out, they would then be stuck in the same spot he would be, and they probably would have been shot and killed. And this was also something that struck me and really made me think. Literally, the thing in your body that brings life, your heart, pumps blood through you, was legitimately every pump was bringing him closer and closer to death. Because every beat of his heart was pushing more blood out of his body. So as I struggle to focus and think through the fierce gunfire, I called out to God, Lord, give me the strength. Upon that prayer, a thought popped into my head. I had watched a documentary and remembered a line from it. Our military trauma doctors are so good that if you can show up at the combat support hospital with a pulse, you have a 90% chance of surviving. I thought that was a phenomenal statistic. I wouldn't have guessed that. I mean, that's unbelievable.
It is.
So at this point, he just wrapped his head around that fact, and he kept saying to him, his motto at that point was "Stay awake, to stay alive." In the midst of the chaos, that became what he focused on, and he said to himself, "I don't care what happens. If I have to reach into my own chest and pump my own heart with my bare fist, I'm going to arrive at the hospital alive." I think it's hard for some of us to put that in perspective a little bit, having to be that desperate to say to ourselves that I'm actually going to pump my own heart to keep me alive. Hopefully most people don't have to be in that situation. With my team holding ground, the AC-130 finally released their first fire mission. And they took down the last of the enemy with precision fire. I had called in danger close fire missions before, but this was closer than anything I'd ever seen. I don't know the parameters on what they consider danger close.
It's different for whatever ordinance they're bringing in.
It is.
Yep.
All I know is it was danger close is basically you're so close that whatever they're shooting could kill the person calling it. You could get yourself killed by calling it where you're at. So I had called in danger close finishes before, but this was closer than I'd ever seen. Okay. So now his team leader had to call fire directly on our position. So this might have been a podcast I listened to where he tried to get a medal for his team leader for, I think they had to patch through to the actual AC-130 themselves and be like, no, you have to do this or we're going to die anyway. And Jason Redmond tried to get him a medal for that. And I think they did. I can't remember. He was trying to get him, was it the Navy Cross or I can't remember. I don't know all the awards they give. But he got that guy, he pushed to have that guy get an award for what he had done. My team leader had to call fire directly on our position, literally only a few yards away from me, to push the enemy back. This was as danger close as it got. I watched the rounds impact the ground directly in front of us and explode, sending dirt, debris, and fragments directly over our heads. These fire missions ended up being the closest rounds dropped near friendly forces in the entire Iraq War, and they also saved our lives and enabled us to finally win the gunfight. The medevac landed about 75 yards from my position, and my team leader said it was time for me to go. The average human body has 8 to 12 units of blood coursing through it. Later, when the helicopter arrived at the combat hospital, I would need 4 units of blood. But despite my severe blood loss, despite the fact that I had been completely unable to move minutes before, I somehow got up and hobbled to the helicopter under my own power. He still kept that same saying in his head, stay awake, stay alive, overcome. In the following days, Jason was disturbed by the way people seemed to be looking at him. As he lay in the hospital, he overheard a conversation that showed him how people saw him now. Was this how things were going to be now? Was this how people were going to see me, a cripple, a disfigured man forever ruined by a war that claimed so many, a powerless victim? Was I going to be looked down upon for the rest of my life as an object of pity? These incidents led Jason posting a note on his hospital. It's amazing what we allow people to look down on us on pity about. When this guy, Jason Redmond, wasn't allowing anyone to look down on him, at least in my own life, I allow very insignificant things to allow people to feel pity for me for. You know what I mean? I mean, this whole thing is just a huge perspective.
I think there's a connection between that sense of self-pity and the accountability or the sense of taking ownership that we talked about earlier. It's like part of taking ownership of your situation is accepting it and working from that point forward. If you're seeking pity, you're essentially asking people to validate your pain or to validate your suffering. And even though you can understand why if you're in a lot of pain that would feel good in the short term, you're ultimately not taking accountability and you're not accepting things as they are and operating from that point forward. So to me, those things go hand in hand.
One of the big themes of this book is to get out of the ambush or off your X, whatever is crippling you, or right. So you feel that self-pity while you're on that X, but that pity is what keeps you there.
Yeah.
And the only way for things to get better in your life is to get off that, to get out of that situation, to make things different. And so it requires you to take ownership of it and work through that and out of that.
Yeah.
So this next part is, and this you can look this up. I think Michelle Obama did something about this letter that he posted. I can't remember exactly what it was. But he decided after that moment to post a letter outside of his hospital room and this is what the letter said. It says, "Attention to all who enter here. If you are coming into this room with sorrow or to feel sorry for my wounds, go elsewhere. The wounds I received, I got in a job I love, doing it for people I love, supporting the freedom of a country I deeply love. I am incredibly tough and will make a full recovery. What is full? That is the absolute utmost. Physically, my body has the ability to recover. Then I will push about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you are about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense, rapid growth. If you're not prepared for that, go elsewhere." One thing we're really trying to get through to the team this year is the power of supporting one another and what that does to you mentally, what it allows you to push through. Multiple examples, just something as simple as during the offseason we run 40s in the hall, we line the team up to encourage them as they run them, and 90% of the kids PR. They get a faster time than they've ever had just from people sheerly cheering them on. When we did the SWAT workout the other week, that kept some of them going was having other teammates encourage them. It's amazing how hard it is for teenagers to go outside of their comfort zone and vocally encourage each other. Some of them will clap, but that doesn't do a whole lot. It's got to be something vocal, say someone's name, and so they know you're there and you're looking at them and you're encouraging them specifically.
I also think there's a misconception, especially amongst young men, that I'm an individual, I don't care. For this Navy SEAL to acknowledge that the energy that people bring into his room matters. If you come in here feeling sorry for me, that is actually going to harm me.
And he was also very knowledgeable of just his family being there for him, right? It wasn't him. It wasn't solely him doing these things. It was his wife being there for him, his kids being there for him. It's people coming around you to help you pull you out of these situations.
And to be able to acknowledge that that's actually a strength, is to be able to acknowledge the network around you and to understand that other people's mentality is going to have a direct impact on you, and your mentality is going to have a direct impact on everybody else. And when you're on a team, those things can snowball really quickly. If a couple people are being really negative, it's not going to take long before the whole team starts to be negative, and that same dynamic works in the opposite. And that's what ultimately we've been trying to cultivate is a culture where we are positive to one another, which is counterintuitive for a teenage boy.
Well, it's
we're not accustomed to saying nice things to each other. And
along with being positive, just positive, I know this kind of sounds weird, it's hard but positive energy. Yeah. Someone who's willing to work hard and do what's necessary, and that goes for our coaching staff, our players. We don't want anyone around who is going to bring negative energy. We could post the same exact sign outside of our school, and it would be legit. It would be a legitimate thing we could do. And it's really, we could look at our school as a whole. No one come in. If you're going to have a negative attitude, don't come in here. Yep. Our program, if you're going to be negative and criticize and not take ownership of things, don't come in here, because that just tears people down. And that's essentially what he was saying. Don't come in here, because now you're making me a victim. Now you're going to make me sad and depressed. Stay away. Only come in here if you're positive. And that, in different scale, but that's essentially what we need in our program.
That's right. One of the things that I've learned in teaching and coaching is there are days where I come in and I am not feeling positive. I'm not in a good place. But understanding that my job is to be present anyway, I'm kind of faking it at first, where I'm like, okay, I have to be positive. Here's my smile. But it doesn't take long before that starts to become real. And I think that that's something I've learned with time, is that actually it's a real asset.
And it becomes infectious the more you get it from other sources around you too. Right? Brad brings what he can in, somebody else brings a little bit, and Brad
pulls him up. That pulls him up. That pulls the other person
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a network effect.
Yeah. So at this point, Jason Redmond, he says that he will never again let anyone look at him with pity. And Never again would he let someone else look at him with pity. He would overcome, is what he's thinking here. And then he mentions his favorite poem, Invictus. I would recommend looking that up. I'm not going to read through it here, but I would recommend looking up that poem. And here's where kind of the lesson comes into play. Craig talked about a little bit about being on the X. So at this point, Jason Rabin makes the realization of people never leaving the site of their ambush. And everyone's ambush is different. That I have a different ambush than Kenny, than Craig, than McMillen, than Brad. It just depends on what you're going through at that time. They weren't leaving their X, and in some instances, they were in fact chaining themselves to those events. We see this every day with the young people that we work with, where they hold on to a negative event in their life, and they let it define them daily. And it impacts them. Well, that's someone who's staying on their X. They're chaining themselves to their X because, to me, it's probably comfortable. They get people feeling sorry for them, and it makes them feel a little better. But the reality is, you don't move on from it, and you can't succeed if you're stuck on that. So now he's talking about how this book of his is his invitation to people who read it to nail their sign on the door and say, I will not be limited by the pain and trauma in my past. And everyone's pain and trauma is different. I will not be held back by the challenges in my future. I will not be forged by them because I am the master of my fate and I will overcome. And then he lists some examples of people that he has worked with throughout his career after the Navy SEALs, of people that he has worked with that have had some things happen to them and they've worked to overcome, whether it was someone in the Army that lost a leg or a limb because of an explosive, people experiencing PTSD. He goes through those examples and what they've all overcome. And then he has a quote here that I want to share with everybody. I believe we are forged in the fires of adversity. We are made strong by the greatness of the challenges that face us, and when something makes us uncomfortable, that's the exact moment to lace up our combat boots, pick up our rucksack, lean into the storm, and drive forward. Stay awake to stay alive. You don't have to have your face shot to get off the X and harness adversity to be a stronger person leader. You just have to wake up and overcome. So many times throughout the years, our football program, we get stuck on an X, whether it was a team we lost to or, you lost a couple games in a row. And that's definitely an X that we have struggled to get off of in the past, that we chain ourselves to. Whether it's a bad play, it could be an interception, a fumble, a missed tackle. Those are all X's and if we don't move on from those, even in a single solitary game, if you don't move on from those, you're not going to win that game. You have to move on from those. I would say there's big X's in our lives and there's small ones. Like within a game, those are little X's that I would say kids sometimes have a hard time moving on from.
And I would say, as a program, our guys, we haven't had as many wins in the last couple of years as we would have wanted, and I don't know if parents realize how much crap these guys take in the hallways.
Yeah.
Whether our guys want it or not, there's an X that they are held to of our program not being a winning program, or we lost to this team by this much. Teachers feed into that, parents feed into that, and of course teenagers feed into that. And that's something that I guess from the outside probably wouldn't have noticed, but that I spend all of this time with these guys, I see it. Like, I see the negativity that they have to deal with. I see that they feel ashamed of games that we lost 9 months ago. And I think that's an X for our program that we've all worked to try to leave in the past, And so I would encourage parents listening, or siblings, or try to be aware of the fact that these guys are sensitive kids who are trying very hard to win football games, and somebody has to lose. And unfortunately, we've taken some losses these last couple of years, but be aware that your negativity has a huge impact on these kids and the way that they think about themselves, the way that they operate in their lives, and it's really hard to win if you're stuck in the past and thinking about losses, So we're all in this together. We all want to win. We all want.
And us coaches are the same way. We struggle
absolutely.
with those past losses, and we struggle with the same things the kids are struggling with. And I probably need to preach this more to the team than I do, but periodically, I reiterate to them that this isn't a us as coaches and you as players program. This is a program. Yes, there are coaches and players, but we're all trying to do this exact same thing here. We're all trying to win on Friday night. We're trying to win on Monday. We're doing this together. It's not just them. It's not just us. It's all of us. But I have always believed that adversity in your life is you learn so much from those events that aren't so much fun to go through. You're going to learn a whole lot more about yourself. That's really what we're trying to do this summer is push them to their limit more than we have in the past, so they can realize, okay, I can push myself a little harder than I thought I could. Putting them through some adverse situations together, helps them grow together, helps them become closer, and it helps them learn about themselves and what they can accomplish. So, even though the last couple of years we haven't, everyone wants to win 10 games. I know I've learned a lot about myself and the value that I place on things in my life. But hopefully, even in those games that we may not win, we're learning a lot about ourselves. And I've always said too that the greatest things in life are never easy. It wouldn't be as enjoyable to win a game. Okay, one might be fun. If you're winning every game by 45 points, eventually that gets old. That it doesn't become as special when you do win those games. So, anything else, guys?
I guess. Do you want me? I'm just gonna cover real quick. I guess why we decided to start doing these.
Yep.
Right, and so I've already covered one of them a little bit, which was thinking about things outside of yourself, things at large to help draw you up out of that well of despair that we sometimes find ourselves in when we're focused on our own pain. Another one is just it's very hard to teach mental toughness and in a way that's not cliche and just super
And I hate cliche.
Yeah, and awkward and weird, right? And so one of the things is connecting things to stories.
Yeah.
And our guys are going to have to put up with a lot of military stories just because that's my background. So that's where I know to go find the stories.
Well, and it's also
about hardship.
If you try and find stories, there's not a lot out there.
Yeah.
Most of them, if you try and find one, it's about some famous person. I don't want to read about some famous person. You know what I mean? So to me, the military stories are probably the best.
Right. And so one of the better ways of teaching mental toughness is giving them stories about people being mentally and physically tough, overcoming adversity, right, and working through tough situations. And that's what we're trying to do. But yeah, so that was kind of my reasoning and philosophy for developing these stories. And we have a couple more that we've put together that I think we're going to go ahead and try to do, right?
Oh yeah, we'll do another one this Thursday with the team.
Right, and it lets you connect things that might have been cliche and might still be cliche, but it connects it to a story that we know isn't cliche, right?
Yeah,
the Jason Redmond story is not a cliche. That was real things happening to a real person. And when I walk up to a kid in a tough spot and I say, we got to overcome, right? That word now has
much
specific
more
meaning,
Correct.
right? I can draw, mental images of Jason Redmond going through something very difficult. And I think that's a huge thing. It helps not be cliche, I guess. So.
Yeah. Even if we have to just say, hey, you remember that story about Jason Redmond? We got to overcome, One of the things that I mentioned this, because a lot of kids love, and these guys in this room love superheroes and stuff too. This is like a real life story of a superhero here. You know, I mean, he did superhuman type things where he shouldn't be alive in all aspects of reality. He should not be alive, and he is. So that's very cool for these kids to hear those stories. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you have questions, please submit those to the Coach's Office Podcast at gmail.com. This is the Coach's Office. Thank you for listening.